Hey, Kevin here, top 100 financial advisor, two-time author, one-time bestseller, and we are here to talk about the stock market. As you already know, this is a part of our series of our 21-day Q&A, and I want to, as I've been doing this entire time, all year long, answering your biggest questions. So one of those were, are IPOs better? Now, the person that submitted this question, and it was submitted more than once, didn't really specify what I'm comparing it to. So it has to be better than, well, what? So what we're going to do instead is discuss some options. So we're going to discuss number one, what are IPOs, which many of us know already, but we're going to rehash that, but also really compare, is it better than a stock that's been out for a while? Is it better than an index fund? And kind of trot that out and see where we land. So an IPO, and again, we've done an entire video on this, and we've done several IPO videos for individual companies. But an IPO is an initial public offering. It's the first time people like me and you can buy the stock. We can get it on Robinhood or Public or Fidelity or wherever else. So it's the very first opportunity that regular people like us can buy it. IPOs happen a lot. 2020 was a very busy IPO season. 2019 was the best IPO season in my recollection. Now, it was only 2 years ago now, but it was just so many names that you have heard of, or at least that I heard of. So it doesn't make it the best year ever. It's just the one that I remember the most. So examples, Slack went public. They IPO'd that year. Snapchat was like 2015 or so. Uber, Lyft, Pinterest. There are a lot of big names that went public in 2019. In 2020, some of the big ones, DoorDash, GoodRx was another one, Snowflake, C3 AI. Those are some of the ones that went public. So when we look at those, we always have to compare it to, well, what else is out there, like a Microsoft or an Apple and companies that have been around for a while. It really depends. Like an IPO can do very, very well or do very, very bad, or obviously be right in the middle and do nothing. My preference, my bias is towards more established companies that I can predict a bit better, and companies that I know, like, and trust, really on that know and trust part of it. Because if I'm putting my money into something, I need to know. I need to have, at the last 10 years, 90% of the time, this company does well, or I know for a fact it pays dividends, or I know how they've done in the last recession. Like those are things that I need to check off of my personal box before I decide to invest in something. I broke that rule for Snowflake. I don't intend on breaking that rule anytime soon. Again, you can't just be breaking all the rules all the time just because you really are into something. So for me, it's a toss-up, but I'm going to lean towards no. IPOs are not better than the average stock that's out there, but that comes with some caveats. So, for example, always know that some stocks or some IPOs, when they come out the first time, they do very well within the first few months, and then they just come back down to earth. Some just come out crashing and stumbling over themselves for a while. For example, I don't think Twitter has really done all that much since their IPO years and years ago. I don't know if they IPO'd in 2013 or 2015, whenever it was, as of this recording, they ain't been all that great. Snapchat hadn't been good up until like December 2020. Uber and Lyft were terrible. Uber specifically was one of the worst IPOs in history at that point in time in 2019. Things have improved a bit in 2020. So you have to decide, is that something that you are going to just roll with and know that it's going to kind of fall off the map for a while? It's a good question. Slack, they went public, they were bad, and they continued to be pretty bad until Salesforce said, look, we're going to buy them. The stock is so cheap now that we can afford to buy this entire company. And that was back at the end of 2020. On the opposite end, Facebook started off terrible in I think that was 2012, and they've shot up and they're one of the biggest companies and hottest stocks out there. That really depends. If you go back, and I've done this before too in a separate video, if you go back to Tesla, Tesla was a terrible stock. Like that's not a stock that anybody would really want to own until about I think it was like 2018, 2019. I'm sorry, 2017, 2018, 2019. That's when it really started to take off. So again, the IPOs that are coming out now, let's just take a DoorDash or even an Airbnb. Airbnb did well, DoorDash did not within the first few days. 7 years from now, could DoorDash be the next big thing? Could Airbnb be the next big thing? No one really knows. We cannot predict the future, but that's the allure of it. And that's the question you have to ask yourself. So, I think it's much more of a gamble right now when you jump into an IPO because it is unknown territory. Even if the company has been established before, a company can exist for years and years and years, and then decide, look, we want to go public. But people's perceptions and their thoughts and how they feel about the market can really weigh on where that stock goes. For example, just go back to November, the election, the stimulus, whether this or that was going to happen, who was going to win the House, who was going to win the Senate, all that stuff weighed on the stock market. It may not have anything to do with the actual business, but it did weigh on the stock market, and a lot of people lost money, even though the stock was fine. So that's another thing that you have to consider is all the outside stuff and how it could affect a stock and when that stock will go public. Airbnb, I mean, they went public. They started off very well at the end of 2020 with the pandemic. How things are going to play out, I don't know. I'm optimistic. I'm more optimistic rather than I was about DoorDash. And we talked about why I wasn't as optimistic about DoorDash. But again, 7 years from now, it could be something. It cannot be something. So you always want to pay attention to that. What I'm going to do real quick before I end this is I wanted to run a quick comparison. You guys can't see it, so give me a second. Because what I want to do is I mentioned Twitter. I want to see if Twitter is actually good or better than anything else out there. So what I'm going to do is compare. Again, you won't be able to see it. I want to say Twitter came out in 2014. So I'm going to go back. Maybe 1 second, y'all. Bear with me, please. As I say in church. All right, so TWTR. All right, and I'll share my screen here in a second just so y'all can see. All right. Okay, so what I'm looking at is a really cool website called Stock Comps. It gives you comparisons of the market and what you can compare it to. One just cool tool that I learned about. I actually know the guy who built this. All right, so I just went back to 2014. I compared it to something like McDonald's. As you see, if you put $1,000 in Twitter, you actually would have made money. 3% ain't much to really write home about, but it's 3%. Or I'm sorry, 3% per year. So you would have made 20% total, which again, that's not much. McDonald's, as you see, would have been up a total of 168%. And if you just got a regular index fund, you'd be up about 120%. So yeah, Twitter did grow. It grew 20%, but over what is that? Almost 6.5 years. So what? So 3% a year, you can do better in a bunch of different places. There are stocks that pay dividends of 3%. So you could have done a whole lot better. So that's one example. Twitter, not all that great. But there are some on the opposite end, Tesla being one of them, that did well, but they did well in a shorter time frame, meaning it wasn't until 8 years into it, 9 years into it that it really started to take off. All right, so that is it for me. Our IPO is better. It's a 50-50 shot. I don't recommend them unless you really know what you're doing, unless you're willing to take on the risk. If you're somebody who's risky and going into it, this is going to be really big or really bad, then fine, you go for it. You still, in my view, should still follow that 5% rule, which you talked about. Feel free to go back and review that one. So if I'm doing an IPO, I'm limiting and saying like no more than 5%, but especially because this is risky, I'm looking at like 1 or 2% at most, but that's just me. All right, so that's it for me. Hope you learned a bit more about IPOs. If you enjoyed this, make sure you hit the share button. Tell people about the channel. Tell people about the page so they can like it and learn just like you. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.